Silence is not always the absence of sound. Sometimes, it is the weight of everything a person has swallowed for years, finally deciding it will not stay buried. For nearly 2 decades, Dora lived inside that kind of silence. She was a cook on a sugar plantation in Louisiana in the 1850s. She rose before dawn, built the fires, stirred the pots, salted the meat, and fed a family who never bothered to learn her last name. She moved through the house the way furniture does, useful, present, unseen. And because she was unseen, she heard everything. When people believe you are part of the background, they stop lowering their voices. Belle Haven Plantation sat 12 miles south of Baton Rouge, stretched across land forced into productivity by labor its owner preferred not to think about. Gerald Havfield was 53 in the summer of 1857. He thought about yields, about sugar prices in New Orleans, about barrels and weather and profit margins. He had trained himself not to see the human machinery that made his world run. Not cruel in the theatrical sense, just ordinary in a way that allowed cruelty to breathe unchallenged. Dora had walked the same jasmine-covered path from the kitchen house to the main house for 18 years. 40 feet of brick and packed earth. 40 feet beneath the rear windows of Gerald's study, which were almost always open against the Louisiana heat. He had long ago stopped noticing her footsteps below. That was his mistake. Dora had been brought to Belle Haven in 1839, around 19 years old. Records of enslaved people were incomplete, more careful about livestock than about human beings. But she arrived with skill. She could cook, and she understood quickly that excellence was armor. A bad cook was punished. A great cook was left alone. So she became great. The kitchen became her territory, not freedom, but space. Space carved out by competence. And from that space, she observed. She knew Gerald's eldest son, Philip, was drowning in debt from nights in New Orleans he could not afford. She heard it in the way he exhaled when letters arrived. She saw it in the ash from burned correspondence in his fireplace. She knew Gerald's wife, Cecily, was sending letters to her sister in Richmond through secret channels, bypassing the usual post. Cecily spoke in lowered tones in rooms with high ceilings, not realizing that sound travels differently than pride imagines. She knew the younger son, Robert, was meeting with people his father would never approve of, reading ideas that could dismantle the very structure that held Belle Haven together. And she knew something else. When the house falls, it does not fall evenly. Those at the bottom are crushed first. In June of 1857, a man named Cyrus Holt arrived unannounced. He carried a leather satchel and attention he tried poorly to disguise. Dora walked the jasmine path as usual. She did not slow. She did not linger. She listened. The debt Holt came to discuss was not Philip's gambling debt. It was larger, older, dangerous. Gerald had entered into arrangements with men in New Orleans, arrangements profitable at first and now turning sour. The numbers Dora heard drifting through the open window were big enough to frighten her. In July, a different visitor came, not to the front door, but through the vegetable garden at dusk. He asked for Dora, not for Gerald, not for Robert. He spoke carefully. Robert, he said, had taken something, documents connected to a quiet movement forming beneath the surface of Louisiana society. The young man had become careless. The papers needed to move without him. He asked Dora if she would help. For 18 years, she had been the one who carried information, never the one asked to act on it. She said she would think about it. Then came the conversation at the bottom of the back staircase, a door not fully latched, voices not fully lowered, a man in Baton Rouge asking questions. Cyrus Holt explaining what should be done about men who ask too many questions. Gerald's silence afterward said more than his words. That was the moment Dora's silence changed shape. It was no longer just weight. It had edges. Dora could not read fluently. That was by design. Literacy was power, and power was forbidden. But she had learned enough over the years. Letters from labels, scraps of lists, menus left on kitchen tables. She could write her name, about 40 words besides. It was not enough. But there was a boy in the stables. Lenny was 14, small, sharp, watchful. He had learned to read by standing outside the schoolroom window while the Havfield children were tutored. Listening for years, memorizing patterns, teaching himself in pieces. Dora had known about his literacy for 3 years. She had seen the way his eyes moved across a page. That is not something you mistake. In August of 1857, she went to him. She told him what she needed. She did not soften the risk. She did not pretend it was small. She gave him the choice. He said, yes, paper had to be gathered slowly. Ink had to be replaced with tinted water before anyone noticed. For 2 weeks they prepared. Small deceptions. Careful adjustments. The kind you learn when survival depends on precision. They worked at night in the kitchen house after the plantation slept. The first evening, they sat in silence. Dora had carried 18 years of memory. Turning memory into record is a different kind of labor. Then she began. She started at the beginning. The shape of the household when she first arrived. The personalities as they had introduced themselves to her. She built the story slowly, so whoever read it would understand how people become what they become. 9 nights. On the 4th night, she knew they were halfway. On the 7th, they reached the most dangerous parts, the debt, the arrangement, the man in Baton Rouge, the name, August Fry. Lenny's hand slowed. She told him to keep writing. She spoke of a field worker's death that had never sat right with her. Of a woman sold after a conversation overheard through an open window. Of accounts adjusted to hide slow financial collapse. Of visiting men whose patience felt like ownership. She dictated the names exactly as she had heard them. On the final night, she said, write this as I say it. My name is Dora. I have lived on this plantation for 18 years. Everything. Here is true as I know truth, what I have seen and heard myself. I am not a person the law gives authority to, but keeping important things inside you is its own kind of harm. I have been careful my whole life. Tonight, I am choosing something different from careful. She told him to write the date. August 22nd, 1857. She wrapped the pages in oiled cloth and hid them beneath a false bottom in an old oak chest in the kitchen. She had found that hidden space years earlier by accident. For 15 years, it had held nothing. Now it held everything. Weeks later, officials came. Documents were served. Gerald Havfield left Belhaven under legal pressure that official records describe in dry language. Robert disappeared into a different life. Philip did not return. Cecily's secret letters turned out to be preparations. The plantation changed. Dora stayed long enough to keep the kitchen running during the transition. Chaos harms the vulnerable first. She would not let that happen if she could prevent it. The main house burned in 1871. The kitchen survived. In 1923, 66 years after Dora dictated those pages, a schoolteacher named Agnes Turreau helped clear the old kitchen building. The sack chest was too heavy to move. She investigated. She found the false bottom. She found the pages. Agnes sat on the dusty floor and read them in one afternoon. Then she spent 15 years trying to convince institutions that they mattered. Most doors closed. Eventually, a young historian recognized a name in the pages, August Fry, from obscure federal investigation records. The details matched. Too precisely to be coincidence. The pages were authenticated. The paper, the ink, the handwriting, all consistent with 1850s Louisiana. Lenny's self-taught script grew steadier across the 9 nights. Scholars could measure the confidence increasing in his hand. The original pages now rest in an archive. Some are damaged by humidity. Some words are gone, but most remain. We do not know what happened to Dora. Records may exist, but none are certain. We do not know what became of Lenny. We do not know who the man in Baton Rouge was. We do not know how many things Dora chose not to say, but we know this. In a world designed to prevent people like her from writing anything at all, she made a record. And in the margin of one of those pages, added later in a different hand, there is a single line that scholars still debate. She knew everything. She was always listening. The most unsettling part of Dora's story is not what she witnessed. It is that her words survived.